Have you ever lost someone and couldn't understand why? 11 years ago, my dad vanished without a trace. For over a decade, I was left with unanswered questions and a growing dread. But now, I think I've uncovered the horrifying truth behind his disappearance. Join me as we delve into the dark, twisted tale that has haunted my family for years. This is the story of my dad's chilling disappearance. My dad was, and still is, my hero. I'm sure it sounds like spontaneous backyard barbecues, tucked into his palm as he enthusiastically shook hands with every policeman in the backyard he met, and etched into the crinkles of his eyes as he let out another boisterous laugh, the sort of laugh that made everyone else in the area want to laugh with him. People, it seems, loved him too. He wrote a lot of books, and apparently his personality shone even in writing because they sold incredibly well. It was after the smashing success of one book in particular, one discussing folk legends in our home state of Colorado, that he decided we would buy the vacation home. God, it seems bitterly ironic looking back on it now. But we'll get to that. The vacation home was in a tiny Welsh town called Arfordir. It was, as the Welsh name suggests, on the sea, and the town lined a semicircular divot in the country's coastline, flanked on either side by craggy cliffs. Only a short distance out from the beach, approximately where the center of the circle would be if it were completed, there was a tiny island. It was scarcely more than a large rock, harboring little besides a couple of small grottos. Very fondly. My dad was deeply interested in the area, not only because he appreciated Welsh culture, or what little remained after the gentrification of the area, but also because of some of the town's more unique attractions. Two in particular stand out to me as I reflect on it, and both involved the island. If you were outside at night, or when a dense fog had blanketed the town, you could hear a low, haunting melody rolling in off the sea. It was like someone playing the flute, resonant and mournful, far away across the water. My dad thought that it was the wind, catching in the cracks and crevices of Morgan's Isle and flowing back out across the water, friction from the sea-soaked rocks producing the ghostly howl. During the day, he said, the sounds of the town drowned it out. But at night, we would sit together on the back porch of the house and listen to the island sing across the inky sea. From our porch, it was also possible to observe the other phenomenon. If you looked out towards the island on a clear night, it was possible to see small, glittering points of light drifting over the dark water. They typically appeared in pairs, and they seemed to dip and swell as if riding atop the waves. My dad thought that it was a trick of the moonlight, perhaps an unusual reflection from something on the island or the shore. He thought they were beautiful. Like diamonds drifting on the sea, he said. And I looked up at him, stars in my eyes, and agreed. I was only 9. He had decided that he was going to go out fishing for the day. We had a small boat, and he went out on it pretty frequently, leaving in the mid-morning and not returning until the last dregs of sunlight were slipping from the sky. Usually he would let me come with him, and I begged to go that day too, but he wouldn't let me. I'm still not sure why. Maybe I had been particularly clingy for the days preceding, or maybe he was planning to go out and do something dangerous that morning. I don't know. But I do know that as darkness fell that evening, he didn't come back, and he never did again. They found the boat bashed up against the cliffs a few miles down the coast from Arfordir, but no sign. turned up, and after the worst plane ride of our lives, my mom and I had to bury an empty casket. We didn't go back to the vacation home after that. We were all right financially, as my dad had left us a sizable chunk of savings to supplement my mom's income, but we couldn't face going back to where it had all happened. At the same time, though, my mom couldn't bear to get rid of the place, and so it sat, falling into disrepair for 11 years. Until a few days ago, I recently turned 20 and, after having something of an early life crisis, decided it was time to get some closure. My mom was not a big fan of my decision. If it was up to her, we would just let the house rot to nothing and never think about it again. But I had made up my mind, and before she could mount any real effort to stop me, I was bound for Cardiff Airport. I opted to check into Arfordier's small inns rather than attempting to stay in the house. This turned out to be a smart decision, as when I arrived at our old vacation home, it was in a state of severe disrepair. Being so close to the sea, weathering had taken its toll on the home's exterior, and the once well-kept garden had turned into a tangle of unkempt grass and thorny weeds. The interior was largely preserved, save for one room that had flooded through a hole in the roof. But a thick layer of dust had settled over what little furnishings had remained when we'd vacated the place. The evening was fast approaching, and I decided that it would be best if I returned to the inn to decide what to do with the place. As I was pushing through the door, I turned back one last time, half expecting to see my dad sitting on the stairs behind me. But no one was there. After a restless night, I decided to spend the next day yesterday out on the water. I bought some supplies from a dingy little tackle shop and slid into a rented boat in the harbor. As I chugged out into the sea, I had this eerie feeling that I was reliving my dad's last day. Peering across the glittering waves, my eyes snagged on a narrow cave tucked into the jagged flank of Morgan's Isle. I started steering towards it for a moment, but stopped myself. What was I doing? I'd seen people try to approach the cave before, and a patrol boat would always stop you, saying that it wasn't safe for public access. Liable to collapse, they'd say. A tiny part of my brain whispered that they probably hadn't checked there all those years ago. They would have thought that it was too dangerous, not worth the risk of searching. Maybe, just maybe. No. I shook my head as if to knock the idiotic thoughts out of my brain. I was there to get closure, not to open some silly, dangerous, and likely fruitless investigation. I found myself a good spot a little ways past the island instead, and settled in for a day of fishing. I didn't end up catching anything. We had never caught much when I was younger anyway, and the years between had taken their toll on the already dwindling fish population. Besides, I could never quite completely wipe the thoughts of the cave from my mind. Before I knew it, the afternoon had slipped away into the evening, and darkness spread quickly across the sky like a stain. As I rounded the island, I could see no other silhouettes against the shimmering lights of the town. I was alone on the water, and I was so close to the cave. I dragged my palms down my face. I knew I wouldn't get a wink of sleep if I didn't at least check, and besides, now was the perfect opportunity, with no patrol boats crawling around. Hidden by the darkness of the open sea, I anchored the boat as close as I could to the tiny, rocky beach at the cave's mouth, and splashed my way to the entrance, wincing as the icy water soaked into my sneakers. Standing on the gravel beach, I fumbled in my pocket. I was relieved to feel the clink of my key ring against my fingertips. Pulling it out, I pressed the button on the small flashlight that I kept clipped to the ring, and its weak beam cut through the darkness ahead of me. The small comfort that the light afforded me was dashed as I heard scuffling from behind some large stones just a few feet ahead. My hand shook as I pointed the flashlight toward the source of the sound, and I stumbled back as a figure moved from behind the rocks. "Dad?" It had come out as a question, but as my disbelieving eyes flickered over the man in front of me, I was sure it was him. He He was much older and far scruffier than he was when I'd last seen him, and he was still somewhat obscured by the shadows of the cave entrance. Still, artificial. Like the false eyes they stick in taxidermied animals, a poor imitation of the real thing. My dad was an anthropologist, and I know a person when I see one. This wasn't. The next few minutes are a blur in my memory. I remember sprinting back in the direction I'd come, slipping and sliding on the algae-coated stone beneath me. I could hear him chasing me, and worse, I could hear more of them behind him, scampering through the cave on what sounded to me like wet, slippery raw. As I ran, I kicked rocks backward, hoping they would slow the creature's progress. I guess it must have worked, because the next thing I knew, I had flung myself into my boat and gunned it away from the island, not even bothering to look back and see how close an escape it had been. This brings me to today. As you might expect, I didn't sleep a wink. I spent the whole night researching, trying to figure out exactly what it was that happened to me. From what I've put together, the first part of the story I was told was likely true. My dad probably did see the cave, seek the opportunity to explore it under the cover of darkness, and venture deep into it, hoping to discover a hidden anthropological treasure. But I don't think he found anything human in that horrible place, and I am certain now, even more than I was, that he is dead. Do you know where the name Morgan's Isle comes from? I certainly didn't before my midnight research session. I had always assumed that it was just named after an important figure in the area, like Jacksonville or Pennsylvania in the US. It turns out, though, that this is not the case. I doubt that many of the current residents of Arfordeer would pick up on the name's significance. Hardly any of them are Welsh, and fewer still are old enough or rooted enough in the area to remember any of the legends attached to it. As it turns out, a Morgan, or Morgan, is a Welsh term for a creature that entices men into its lair, usually with its beauty or enchanting voice, to drown or consume them. In the US, we might refer to this creature as a siren. I believe that it is likely these creatures that I encountered in the cave last night, and if this is the case, there is no doubt in my mind that they are responsible for the disappearances of several visitors and locals alike over the years, including my poor father. As I am typing this, I am sitting on the back porch of the old vacation home. My flight leaves tomorrow morning. They aren't anything like diamonds. Looking at them now, I can see them for what they are: fake, dead, empty.